The ballroom lights caught the diamond on Rachel Kim's finger before anyone saw her face.
Still
Still
not
not
married,
married, huh?
huh?
Derek's voice cut across the
Whoa.
room, loud enough for the
Some
bar to
things never
hear.
change.
He held his glass up like a toast. Some things never change. Laughter came from the table behind him. A woman covered her mouth. A man in a gray suit looked down at his drink and said nothing. Sarah Park stood by the dessert table with a plate she wasn't eating from. She didn't answer him. She set the plate down and picked her purse up off the chair. Come on, Sarah. It's a joke. Derek stepped closer, his fiancée trailing behind him in green silk, her smile tight and amused. 12 years and you're still this. Sarah's hand found the strap of her purse. She turned toward the exit. That's when the doors opened. 4 men walked in first, dark suits, no expressions. The room's chatter dropped by half. Then a 5th man crossed the floor, and every head in the ballroom turned to follow him instead. He didn't look at Derek. He didn't look at the tables or the banners or the DJ booth still playing soft jazz nobody was listening to anymore. He walked straight to Sarah. He took her hand. She's my wife. 3 words. The room went fully silent, the kind of silent where someone's ice cracks in a glass and it sounds like a gunshot. Derek's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The woman in green silk stepped back like the floor had tilted. Sarah looked at the man holding her hand, and for 1 second, her face showed something nobody in that room could name. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. Before we dive in, are you watching this alone, or is someone right there with you? And where are you tuning in from tonight? Drop your location in the comments. Welcome to Soul Roots Stories. 6 years earlier, the blood bank on 34th Street ran a mobile unit outside Presbyterian Hospital every Tuesday. Sarah gave blood there because her mother used to, before she died, and it felt like something worth continuing. She was in the chair when the doors of the ER burst open across the street and 3 paramedics ran a gurney through, shouting numbers Sarah didn't understand. A nurse came out to the mobile unit 10 minutes later, out of breath. We need O negative. Now. We're short. Sarah looked at the bag already filling from her arm. I'm O negative. Then you just saved somebody's life, the nurse said, and ran back inside with it. Sarah didn't think about it again until 3 days later, when a man in a suit found her at the coffee shop where she worked mornings before her real job started. Are you Sarah Park? She wiped down the counter. Depends who's asking. My employer wants to thank you. You gave blood. It matched. It saved him. The man set an envelope on the counter, thick enough that she could tell without opening it. Sarah didn't touch it. Tell him I'm glad he's okay. He wants you to have this. I don't want it. The man blinked like she'd spoken a different language. It's $50,000. I heard you. Sarah slid the envelope back across the counter. If he wants to thank somebody, there's a program at the hospital. Patients who can't pay their bills. Put it there instead. The man stood there a second too long, like he was waiting for her to laugh and say she was joking. She wasn't. He left with the envelope still in his hand. Jin Ho Choi remembered the ceiling of the ambulance more than he remembered the attack. For men outside a restaurant in Flushing, a disagreement about territory that turned into a knife before anyone could stop it. He remembered the paramedic's face close to his, saying stay with me, and then nothing until a hospital room 3 days later. His grandmother was in the chair beside his bed when he woke up. You lost half your blood, she told him. A stranger gave hers so you could keep yours. Who? Nobody knows. The hospital won't say. His grandmother's hands were folded in her lap, the way they always were when she was deciding something. But whoever she is, she didn't want anything for it. Jin Ho tried to sit up and his side burned like it was still open. I want to find her. I already sent someone. I heard he came back with the money still in his pocket. His grandmother almost smiled. Almost. She sent it to the hospital's charity fund instead. Anonymous, except the hospital told me anyway, because I asked twice. Jin Ho lay back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling that wasn't the ambulance ceiling, but felt the same, white and far away. Find her again, he said. Properly this time. It took his people 4 months to get a name, and by the time they had it, Sarah Park had moved twice and changed jobs once. Jinho kept the folder in his desk drawer for a year before he opened it again, not because he forgot, but because the business that kept him alive was the same business that made finding her dangerous for both of them. He watched her from a distance for a while. An office job. A gym on Tuesdays. Dinner alone most nights at a Thai place 2 blocks from her apartment. He never approached her. Not until his grandmother, without telling him, hired her own investigator and found something Jinho's men had missed, the invitation to Sarah's 10-year high school reunion, postponed twice, finally happening this spring. At the Marriott Ballroom on 6th Avenue. She'll be alone, his grandmother said, sliding the invitation across the dinner table like a chess move. And her ex-fiancé will be there. The one who left her for money. Jinho looked at the paper for a long time. You're not going as a stranger this time, his grandmother said. You're going as her husband. We're not married. Not yet. Jinho found her 2 weeks before the reunion, not at the ballroom but at the Thai place 2 blocks from her apartment, sitting alone at the corner table like always. He didn't send anyone this time. He walked in himself and sat down across from her without asking. Sarah looked up from her phone. Do I know you? You gave blood at a mobile unit outside Presbyterian Hospital. 6 years ago. Tuesday afternoon. Her hand stopped moving on the table. How do you know that? Because it was mine. Jinho kept his voice low, even, no threat in it. You saved my life, and you wouldn't take the money for it. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that measured a person from the inside out. You're the guy in the papers. The one with the restaurants. Some people call me that. Other people call you something else. They do. She didn't flinch, didn't reach for her purse, didn't do any of the things a stranger might expect. She picked her fork back up. You want your money back? I still don't want it. I don't want to give you money. Jinho set his hands flat on the table, nothing hidden in them. I want to ask you something, and you can say no. Ask. My grandmother found out you have a reunion coming up. An ex-fiancé who left you for someone with more money. He watched her face when he said it, saw the small tightening around her eyes that told him it still hurt, even after this long. I want to walk in there with you. As your husband. Sarah put the fork down slowly. You want to fake marry me to embarrass some guy I dated in college. I want to marry you for real. On paper. Whatever protections that gives you, it's yours. He paused. The embarrassing part for him, that's free. That's insane. Probably. I don't know you. You don't have to. I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to let me pay back a debt the only way you'll let me pay it. Jinho leaned back in the booth. You can say no. I'll leave and you won't hear from me again. Sarah sat with that for a long time, long enough that the waiter came and refilled both their waters and left again. Why does it have to be real? She finally said. Why not just show up and say it, no paperwork? Jinho considered how much to tell her and decided on some of it. Because paperwork protects you if anyone ever asks questions about why I was there. A story doesn't hold up under a lawyer. A marriage license does. It wasn't the whole truth. It was enough of it. Sarah looked out the window at the street, at people walking by who had no idea what was being decided at this table. I'm not doing it for free, she said. I didn't expect you to. I'm not doing it for money either. She looked back at him. I want the charity fund. The one I sent your $50,000 to. I want you to match it every year for the next 10 years, no matter what happens between us. Jinho almost smiled, the first real one in longer than he could place. Done. And you don't touch my job, my apartment, my life. I'm not becoming some decoration in your house. You keep everything that's yours. Sarah put her hand out across the table. Then we have a deal, Mr. Choi. He shook it. Her grip was steady. His wasn't shaking either, but something in his chest moved that hadn't moved in years. The courthouse wedding took 11 minutes. Sarah wore a gray dress she already owned. Jinho wore a suit without a tie. His grandmother sat in the second row and cried without trying to hide it, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief that had been her own mother's. Afterward, outside on the courthouse steps, Sarah turned to him. That's it. That's it. Feels like it should be harder than that. The hard part's still coming, Jinho said, and neither of them laughed, because they both knew he wasn't joking. 3 weeks passed before the reunion. In that time, something happened that neither of them planned for. Sarah started staying for dinner after the paperwork was signed, after the fake marriage business was technically done. She'd come by the house, his grandmother's house, where he still lived out of habit and respect, and the old woman would already have food on the table like she'd been expecting her. "You don't have to keep coming," Jinho told her one night, walking her to her car. "I like your grandmother's cooking. That's it." Sarah looked at him across the hood of the car, the streetlight catching half her face. "Maybe I like the company too." He didn't say anything back. He just watched her get in and drive off, and stood there longer than made sense for a man who had somewhere else to be. His grandmother found him still standing in the driveway 5 minutes later. "You're not fooling anyone," she said. "I'm not trying to fool you. I mean her. You're not fooling her either. She looks at you the same way you look at her." His grandmother patted his arm on her way back inside. "Married people who don't love each other don't stay for the cooking." The night before the reunion, Sarah called him instead of texting, which she never did. "I don't think I can go," she said, no greeting first. "Why not?" "Because if you walk in there and say what we planned, everyone's going to think I married you for the money. That I'm exactly what Derek always said I'd become if I got desperate enough." Her voice had an edge in it that wasn't there in the restaurant 3 weeks ago. "I spent 6 years building something on my own. I don't want it to look like I gave up and married my way out." Jinho sat with the phone against his ear for a moment before answering. "Then let them think whatever they want for one night. You know the truth." "I know the truth." "Do I though?" Sarah's voice dropped. "Because I don't actually know why you're doing this, Jinho." "Not really. A debt doesn't explain a wedding ring." The line went quiet between them, the kind of quiet that says more than words would. "Come tomorrow," he finally said. "I'll tell you everything after. I promise you that." She didn't answer right away. "Then, okay." She hung up before he could say anything else, and Jinho sat alone in his office a long time afterward, staring at a ring box on the desk he hadn't opened yet, wondering how much of tomorrow was about Derek at all anymore, and how much of it had quietly become about something else entirely. The ballroom noise dropped to nothing after Jinho said the words. Sarah's hand was still in his, and she could feel her own pulse in her fingertips. Derek found his voice first. "Wife? Since when?" "3 weeks, Sarah said. 3 weeks. Derek looked at Jinho, then back at her, doing math that didn't add up in his head. "You expect anyone to believe that?" "I don't need anyone to believe anything," Jinho said. "I came because my wife wanted to see her old classmates. That's all this is." The woman in green silk pulled at Derek's sleeve. "Derek, let's just go sit down." He shook her off. No, this is Sarah. What is this? Some kind of stunt? You hired an actor to walk in here and..." "Careful," Jinho said, quiet, no heat in it, which somehow made it land harder than if he'd shouted. Derek's jaw worked like he wanted to say more and couldn't find a way to do it that didn't sound worse out loud. A man at the next table pulled his phone out and started filming. Another woman leaned to her friend and whispered something behind her hand. Sarah felt Jinho's thumb move once across her knuckles, barely anything, just enough to say, "I'm here." "We should sit," she said to him. They sat at a table near the back, and the party tried to restart itself around them, DJ cranking the music louder to cover the silence, but the whole room kept stealing looks their way. Derek didn't come near them again that night. He stood by the bar with his fiancée, drink in hand, watching them from across the room like a man trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Sarah leaned toward Jinho. "You didn't have to do the whole careful thing." He was about to say something he couldn't take back in front of a room full of people with phones out. "Maybe I wanted him to." Jinho looked at her, something almost amused in it. "No, you didn't." She didn't argue, because he was right, and it annoyed her that he already knew that about her. They left before dessert. In the car, Sarah sat with her hands in her lap, watching the city go by out the window. "You said you'd tell me everything," she said. "After." Jinho didn't answer right away. He looked out at the road, jaw tight. "There's a man," he finally said, "named Yusuf Demir. Runs a group out of Jersey that used to work with my family, a long time ago, before things went bad between us. 12 years ago there was a shooting at a warehouse in Newark. 3 men from his side didn't walk out of it. 1 witness did. Sarah's stomach dropped, slow, like a floor giving out under her. What does that have to do with me? The witness disappeared into witness protection for years. Recently, something happened. Records got leaked, and Demir's people found out who she really was. Jinho's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. Her name, before protection, was Sarah Park. The car was quiet except for the tires on the road. That's not possible, Sarah said. I don't know anyone named Demir. I've never seen a shooting in my life. You wouldn't remember it as Demir's shooting. You'd remember it as the night your father didn't come home. Jinho glanced at her, careful. You were 7. Your mother moved you 3 times in 2 years after that. You don't remember any of it because you were a kid and the program made sure you never had to. Sarah's hand went to the door handle without meaning to, some old animal instinct to get out, get away, get somewhere that made sense again. How do you know this? Because I've spent 6 years trying to find the woman who saved my life, and somewhere in that search, my people found her file before I found her face. Jinho pulled the car over, put it in park, turned to look at her directly. I didn't marry you only because of the blood, Sarah. I married you because it was the fastest way to put you under protection that Demir's people can't touch without starting a war they can't win. A wife in my family isn't just a name. It's a wall. Sarah stared at him. Her chest was moving fast, and she made herself slow it down, made herself think instead of just feel. So this whole thing, the reunion, Derek, all of it, was real. What happened tonight was real. What I feel sitting here right now is real. His voice dropped rougher. But yes, the timing wasn't only about a debt. It was about getting you somewhere safe before Demir's people decided you were worth more to them dead than alive. Sarah looked out the windshield at nothing, jaw tight, trying to hold the 2 truths in her hands at once, that he'd lied to her by omission, and that he'd also just admitted something to her face that most men would have buried forever. You should have told me before the courthouse, she said finally. Not after. You're right. Jinho didn't defend it. I was afraid if I told you everything, you'd say no, and I'd lose the only chance I had to keep you safe. That was selfish. I know that. Sarah opened the door and got out, standing on the sidewalk in the cold with her arms crossed, needing air more than she needed an apology. Jinho got out too, but he didn't come closer. He gave her the space, hands in his pockets, waiting. I need time, she said. Take it. I'm not leaving. I'm not running from you or from this. I just need a minute to be angry before I decide what I do with it. Take as much time as you need, Jinho said. I'm not going anywhere. Sarah looked at him standing there under the streetlight, patient in a way that didn't match anything she'd been told about men in his world, and something in her chest twisted, equal parts fury and something dangerously close to tenderness. She didn't know yet that 3 miles away, Derek was sitting in his car outside the Marriott, pulling up a search engine on his phone, typing in the name Choi with shaking hands, about to start pulling on a thread that would unravel a lot more than just one wedding. Derek didn't sleep that night. By 6 in the morning, he had a legal pad full of names, half of them crossed out, and a phone call scheduled with a private investigator he used to work with back when he still had money worth protecting. I need everything on a man named Jinho Choi, Derek said into the phone. Family, business, all of it. That's gonna cost you, the investigator said. I don't care what it costs. His fiancée found him at the kitchen table 2 days later, surrounded by printouts, coffee gone cold beside him. You're obsessed, she said. I'm not obsessed. I'm protecting us. Derek didn't look up from the papers. That guy is dangerous, Chelsea. And Sarah married him in 3 weeks. Something's wrong with that picture, and I'm going to find out what. Or you're humiliated and you can't let it go. Derek's head snapped up. Excuse me. You've said her name more in the last 2 days than you have in the last 2 years. Chelsea crossed her arms. I don't care about Sarah Park. I care that you're not sleeping, you're not working, and you're spending money we don't have on some investigator to dig up dirt on a man you're scared of. I'm not scared of him. Then why does your hand shake every time you say his name? Derek didn't have an answer for that. Chelsea left the kitchen without waiting for one. The investigator called back 4 days later with something Derek didn't expect. I couldn't find much on Choi that isn't already public. Guy's clean on paper, or clean enough that nobody's touched him in years. A pause on the line. But I found something else. Wasn't looking for it. Fell into it going through old filings. What? Your father. Robert Ashford. Papers shuffled on the other end. There's a shell company registered under an associate's name, tied to accounts that move money through 3 different states before it lands overseas. I've seen this pattern before. It's not investment income. It's laundering. Derek sat very still. For who? Won't know until I dig deeper. But the accounts connect to a name I recognize. Yusuf Demir. Derek didn't say anything for a long moment. Keep digging. You sure? Once I pull this thread all the way, there's no putting it back. Keep digging, Derek said again, and hung up before he had to hear himself say it a 3rd time. 2 weeks later, federal agents arrived at Robert Ashford's office with a warrant. Derek watched it happen from across the street, standing on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets, unable to make himself go inside. His father came out in handcuffs by mid-afternoon. Cameras were already there. Somebody had tipped off the press before the agents even finished the search. Robert didn't look for Derek in the crowd. He looked straight ahead, jaw locked, the same expression Derek remembered from every argument they'd ever had about the family business, the one that said, "Don't ask questions you don't want answered." By that evening, the engagement was over. Chelsea's family had already called, already made it clear that a bride didn't marry into a name connected to federal indictments and money laundering for organized crime. "You did this," Derek said to his father over the phone from a holding cell, the only call he was allowed. "I didn't do anything you didn't help finish," Robert said, voice flat, exhausted. "You started digging into a man you should have left alone. You wanted to hurt Sarah's husband, and instead you handed the government a map straight to me. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference." The line clicked, silence on the other end, and Derek stood in his empty apartment holding a phone that had nothing left to say to him. He put it down slowly, sat on the edge of his bed, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, thought about the girl at the coffee shop counter who never asked him for anything, and the reward money she'd handed back without blinking, and wondered when exactly he'd started thinking that kind of decency made a person worth mocking instead of keeping. If this story's got you hooked, drop a like, leave a comment telling us what you think happens next, and subscribe to Soul Root Stories so you don't miss what's coming. Sarah found out about the raid the same way everyone else did, a headline on her phone during her lunch break, Robert Ashford's face next to words like federal investigation and money laundering and organized crime ties. She read it twice before she understood what she was looking at. She called Jinho. He picked up on the second ring. "Did you do this?" she said, no hello. "No." His voice was steady. "I didn't touch him. I didn't have to. Derek hired someone to dig into me, and whoever he hired dug in the wrong direction and found his own father instead." That's insane. That's what happens when you go looking for something to use against people who've already got nothing to hide, and instead you find the thing you were never supposed to see in your own family. Sarah sat down slowly at her desk, phone against her ear, staring at nothing. He was trying to hurt you. Because of me. He was trying to hurt himself and didn't know it yet. Jinho's voice softened. "This isn't on you, Sarah. Feels like it's on me. It's not." A pause. "Come by tonight. My grandmother made too much food again. She does that on purpose now, so you'll keep coming back." Sarah almost smiled despite everything sitting heavy in her chest. "I'll come." She hung up and sat there a moment longer, looking at the headlines still open on her screen, thinking about a man in handcuffs whose son had spent 2 weeks trying to destroy a marriage built on debt and quiet protection, and instead had lit a fuse under his own family without ever meaning to. She didn't know yet that 3 states away, a courier working for Yusuf Demir had just delivered an envelope to a lab in New Jersey, requesting a DNA comparison against a case file that had been sealed for 30 years, a missing infant, a wealthy family. A search that had gone cold before Sarah Park was old enough to remember her own name. The lab tech called it a routine request. Somebody paying to compare DNA against a decades-old missing persons case wasn't unusual work, even if the case itself was strange. A billionaire's granddaughter, kidnapped as an infant from a hospital nursery in 1994, never found. What was unusual was who requested it. Demir's people hadn't gone looking for a missing heiress. They'd gone looking for leverage against Jinho Choi, pulling every thread connected to his new wife, hoping to find something they could use. Instead, a routine background check on Sarah Park's birth records turned up a discrepancy nobody expected, a hospital transfer record that didn't match her mother's name, dated 3 days after the Whitfield baby vanished from Lenox Hill. Demir sat with the report for 2 days before he understood what he was holding. "This isn't leverage," his lieutenant said, reading over his shoulder. "This is a bomb." "It's both," Demir said. "Choi's wife might be worth $400 million. And if the Whitfields find out before we can use it, that money walks straight into Choi's protection, and we lose every advantage we have. So, what do we do?" Demir folded the report closed. "We move faster than they do." Sarah didn't find out from Demir. She found out from a woman named Eleanor Whitfield, who showed up at Jinho's grandmother's house on a Thursday evening unannounced, driven by a private car, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm sorry to come like this," Eleanor said, standing on the porch, hands shaking slightly around a manila folder. "But I couldn't wait for an appointment. Not for this." Jinho's grandmother let her in without asking questions first, the way she let everyone in, and sat her at the kitchen table across from Sarah, who had come for dinner and instead found herself staring at a stranger's face that looked, somehow, unsettlingly familiar around the eyes. "My daughter was taken from a hospital nursery 32 years ago," Eleanor said. "I've spent every year since then paying for tests, following leads, chasing people who turned out to be nothing." Her hands trembled opening the folder. "A man I don't know sent me a report 2 days ago. Anonymous. Said I should have it compared against my family's private database." She slid a paper across the table. Sarah looked at it without understanding the columns of numbers and markers, but she understood the header at the top clearly enough, a 99.7% match, her name printed beside a case number she'd never seen before. "I don't understand," Sarah said. "I think," Eleanor said, voice breaking, "you might be my granddaughter." The kitchen went quiet except for the sound of Jinho's grandmother setting down a teapot she'd been holding, very carefully, like the whole room had turned fragile. Sarah sat with her hands flat on the table, staring at the paper, trying to make the numbers mean something different than what they clearly meant. "My mother," Sarah said slowly. "The woman who raised me. She wasn't. There'll be more tests. Official ones. I'm not asking you to believe me tonight." Eleanor reached across the table, didn't touch her, just left her hand open on the wood between them. "I'm asking you to let me find out the truth. That's all I've wanted for 32 years. Sarah looked at Jinho, who had come into the kitchen sometime during this and was standing in the doorway, unreadable, watching her carefully like he already suspected where this was going and didn't know how to prepare her for it. "Did you know about this?" Sarah asked him. "No." His voice was low, certain. "I didn't send that report, Sarah. I don't know who did." Sarah believed him, mostly because she'd learned by now what his lies sounded like, and this wasn't that. The official results came back 9 days later. Confirmed. Sarah Park, born under a different name in a hospital that no longer existed under that address, was Grace Whitfield, granddaughter of one of the wealthiest families on the East Coast, heir to a fortune large enough that the news broke it before Eleanor's lawyers had finished drafting the official statement. The story ran everywhere. Missing heiress found after 3 decades. Sarah's face was suddenly on every screen, alongside old photos of the Whitfield family and a hospital nursery from 32 years ago. Derek watched it on his phone, sitting in the small apartment he'd moved into after losing everything else, and didn't know whether to laugh or put his fist through the wall. Jinho watched it from his office with a different weight sitting in his chest, because he understood something Sarah didn't yet, that Demir hadn't leaked this out of kindness. He'd leaked it to force everyone's hand at once, to make Sarah visible to the entire country in the same week he was planning to make his real move. "She's exposed now," Jinho said to his head of security. "Everyone knows her face. Everyone knows there's money attached to her. Demir wants her rattled, wants the Whitfields distracted, wants an opening." "What kind of opening?" Jinho didn't answer right away. He was thinking about the old case file, the one with 3 names crossed off a witness list, the one where Sarah Park Grace Whitfield was the only name left standing. He's not done, Jinho finally said. The money's a distraction. He still needs her gone before that old case ever sees daylight again. Sarah found Jinho in his office that night, still at his desk long after the house had gone quiet. You look like you're carrying something you're not telling me, she said, standing in the doorway. Jinho looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something close to fear behind his eyes. Come here, he said. She crossed the room and sat across from him. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder she hadn't seen before, set it on the desk between them, didn't open it yet. There's more you need to know, he said. About the shooting in Newark. About why Demir wants you found before the Whitfield's lawyers get too close to you. Tell me. You weren't just a witness to a shooting, Sarah. Jinho's hand rested on the folder, like he was bracing himself as much as her. You watched Yusuf Demir pull the trigger himself. You were 7 years old, hiding under a car in that warehouse lot, and you saw his face clearly enough that the prosecution built their entire case around finding you again someday. Sarah's breath went shallow. I don't remember any of that. You don't have to remember it. He remembers you. Jinho opened the folder finally, turned it toward her. And now that the whole country knows your face and knows you're worth $400 million, he's got 2 reasons to come for you instead of 1. Outside, headlights swept slowly across the driveway and disappeared, and Jinho was already on his feet, already reaching for the phone on his desk, already moving in a way that told Sarah, before he said a single word, that whatever was coming wasn't coming later. It was coming tonight. Jinho was already dialing before the headlights had fully disappeared. Lock the front. Now. Sarah stood up so fast her chair scraped back. Was that them? I don't know yet. He had the phone to his ear, walking toward the hallway. Miho, who's on the gate tonight? A pause. Check the east camera. Now, not in 5 minutes. Sarah went to the window instead of waiting to be told what to do. The driveway sat empty under the porch light, gravel undisturbed, nothing moving. Nobody's there, she said. Get away from the window. She stepped back. Jinho's grandmother appeared in the hallway in her robe, alert in a way that made it clear this wasn't the first time she'd been woken up for something like this. Basement, the old woman said, already moving toward the kitchen. Both of you. Grandmother. I've done this before. You haven't. Move. Sarah followed without arguing, because arguing with a woman who spoke like that felt pointless, and because some part of her recognized this wasn't drama for effect. This was a house that had planned for exactly this night, once a long time ago, and never stopped being ready for it. The basement door led down to a room Sarah hadn't known existed, concrete walls, a steel door at the far end, a bank of monitors already glowing with feeds from cameras around the property. Sit, Jinho said, and for the first time since she'd met him, his voice had an edge in it that wasn't calm at all. Sarah sat. She watched him pull a gun from a lockbox built into the wall, watched him check it with hands that were fast and practiced in a way that told her everything about who he really was underneath the tailored suits and quiet dinners. Talk to me, she said. What do you know? Demir's people were spotted 2 towns over an hour ago. Local contact called it in. Jinho didn't look up from what he was doing. Could be nothing. Could be a scouting run. Could be them coming for me. Could be that too. He finally looked at her. I'm not going to lie to you and say it's fine. I don't know yet. What I know is you're safer in this room than anywhere else in a 50-mile radius, and I'm not leaving until I know for sure which one it is. The monitor in the corner flickered, motion at the tree line behind the property, a shape moving low and fast between the trunks, gone before Sarah could be sure she'd seen it at all. Jinho saw it too. He was already moving toward the stairs. Stay here, he said. Door locks from the inside. Don't open it for anyone but me or her. He nodded at his grandmother. Anyone else, you don't move. Jinho. He stopped at the base of the stairs and looked back at her, and for a second the fear underneath his composure showed all the way through. I need you alive when this is over, he said. That's the only thing I need right now. Then he was gone up the stairs, and Sarah sat in a concrete room with his grandmother, listening to her own heartbeat, waiting. The next 20 minutes moved like they belonged to somebody else's life. Gravel crunched outside, engines, at least 2 vehicles by the sound of it. Voices, low, clipped, not the voices of Jinho's men. Sarah had heard those enough times now to know their rhythm, and this wasn't it. A single gunshot cracked somewhere near the front of the house. Sarah's whole body locked up. Jinho's grandmother reached over without a word and took her hand, gripped it hard enough to hurt, and didn't let go. More shouting. Another shot, further away this time. Then silence that stretched long enough to feel worse than the noise had. Footsteps on the stairs. Fast, uneven. Sarah stood before she could stop herself. "Wait," the grandmother said, sharp, pulling her back by the wrist. The steel door handle turned. Locked. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. A pattern Sarah hadn't known to listen for until this exact moment. "That's him," the grandmother said, and moved to open it. Jinho came through the door with blood on his sleeve that wasn't his own, jaw tight, breathing hard. "It's done," he said. 2 of his men came through the tree line. "My people caught them before they made it to the house." "And Demir?" Sarah's voice barely came out. "Not here tonight. He sent scouts, not himself. Testing how fast we'd move." Jinho crossed the room and pulled Sarah into him before she could ask anything else, his hand at the back of her head, holding her like he was checking with his own body that she was still whole. "He's not done." This was him finding out what he's up against. Sarah stood there against him, feeling his heart going as fast as hers, and something in her chest broke open that had nothing to do with fear anymore. "I thought you didn't need me to know all this," she said into his shoulder. "The blood, the wife, the wall. I thought that's all I was to you." Jinho pulled back just enough to look at her. "That's what I told myself it was, in the beginning. It stopped being that a long time before tonight." "When?" "The night you called me before the reunion and told me you were scared people would think you married for money." His hand came up to her face. "I sat in my office after that call and realized I didn't care anymore what anyone thought, as long as it was you standing next to me saying it." Sarah didn't say anything back. She didn't need to. She kissed him instead, in a concrete room in a basement that had just survived an attack, with his grandmother quietly stepping out to give them the 2 feet of space they needed, and for the first time since the courthouse, neither of them was pretending anything at all. If you're feeling this one, hit like, tell us in the comments what you think Demir does next, and subscribe to Soul Roots Stories so you're here for the ending. Upstairs, 2 of Demir's men sat zip-tied on the living room floor while Jinho's security team waited for instructions. One of them, younger than the other, kept glancing toward the door like he expected someone worse to walk through it any second. "Where's Demir tonight?" Jinho asked, crouching in front of him. The younger one didn't answer. The older one laughed, short and humorless. "You think tonight was the plan," he said. "Tonight was us finding out where your cameras are blind. That's all this was." Jinho's jaw tightened. "Then what's the real plan?" The man's smile didn't move. "Ask your wife's new family. Ask the Whitfields how careful their security really is. Because Demir already knows the answer, and he's not interested in this house anymore." Jinho stood up slowly, already reaching for his phone, already understanding the shape of what was coming before the man finished saying it, that the danger had just moved somewhere Jinho couldn't lock down with a basement and a steel door. Somewhere with garden parties and open lawns and a grandmother who had spent 32 years hoping for exactly the kind of visibility that was about to get her granddaughter killed. Eleanor Whitfield's estate sat on 11 acres in Greenwich, the kind of property with a name instead of an address, hedges trimmed into perfect lines, and a security system built for privacy from photographers, not for men who knew how to use guns. Jinho called her at 11 that night. "You need to move Sarah's welcome dinner," he said, no greeting. "The one you're planning for Saturday. Cancel it or move it somewhere I control. That dinner's been in the papers for 2 days, Mr. Choi. Half of Greenwich already knows about it." "That's exactly the problem." Eleanor was quiet on the line for a moment. "You think someone would come after her at my home?" "I think a man named Yusuf Demir has spent 30 years being very patient, and your granddaughter just became the most visible woman in the country. He's not going to wait for a better opportunity than a garden full of people who don't carry weapons." Eleanor didn't argue further. What do you need from me? Cancel the public part. Family only, my security team runs the perimeter, and nobody outside this call knows the new plan until an hour before it happens. Sarah found out about the change the next morning, sitting across from Jinho at the kitchen table while his grandmother made coffee neither of them was drinking. You're scaling back my own welcome dinner without asking me, Sarah said. I'm keeping you alive without asking you. There's a difference. Jinho didn't look up from the security schematics spread across the table, thick black lines marking sight lines and blind spots across Eleanor's property. You can be angry about it. You can't skip it. I'm not angry. I'm scared. Sarah said it flat, no performance in it. And I don't want to hide that from you anymore either. Jinho looked up then. Something in his face softened, just slightly, at the honesty of it. I'm scared too, he said. I don't say that a lot. I'm saying it to you. Sarah reached across the table and put her hand over his, over the schematics, over the careful lines mapping out how to keep her alive through Saturday night. Then we do this together, she said. Not you protecting me from a basement while I sit in the dark not knowing anything. Together. Jinho studied her for a long moment. That's not how this usually works. Nothing about this has worked how it usually does. Why start now? Saturday came fast. Eleanor's estate had been quietly stripped down to 20 guests instead of 200, Jinho's men positioned in places that looked like waitstaff and garden crew to anyone who didn't know better. Sarah stood on the back terrace in a pale blue dress, holding a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, watching the tree line at the edge of the property the way Jinho had taught her to, not staring, just noticing. Derek showed up uninvited at 7:15. He came through the front gate on foot, having talked his way past the outer checkpoint by claiming he was an old friend of the family, which technically wasn't a lie. By the time security caught up to him, he was already crossing the lawn toward the terrace, hands empty, face pale. I need to talk to her, he said to the man blocking his path. 2 minutes. That's it. Jinho intercepted him before it went further. You shouldn't be here. I know. Derek held both hands up, no threat in the gesture. I know I don't deserve 2 minutes of anyone's time after everything. I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to tell her something. Sarah had already crossed the terrace by then, close enough to hear. Derek. I'm sorry. He said it fast, like he'd been rehearsing it the whole drive over and needed to get it out before he lost the nerve. For the reunion. For every year before that where I made you feel like being kind instead of rich was something to be embarrassed about. I lost everything because I couldn't let go of hating you for being better than me, and he stopped, swallowed. I needed to say it before something happened to either of us, and I never got the chance. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, the man who used to be the center of a life she didn't want anymore. Thank you for saying it, she said. I hope you rebuild something good. I mean that. Derek nodded, something loosening in his shoulders, like the apology had cost him more than the fortune had. That's when the first shot hit the security light above the terrace, shattering it, and the whole garden dropped into half-darkness at once. Everything after that moved in pieces. Guests screaming, scattering toward the house. Jinho's arm across Sarah's chest, shoving her down behind the stone balustrade before she'd even processed the sound. Derek hitting the ground beside her, face against the stone tile, breathing hard. Tree line, south side, Jinho said into his radio, voice flat and fast. 2 shooters minimum. Get Mrs. Whitfield inside. More shots, closer together now, answering fire from Jinho's men positioned near the hedges. Sarah pressed herself against the stone, heart slamming, watching Jinho move in a low crouch toward the edge of the terrace, gun out, completely unrecognizable from the man who sat across the kitchen table that morning. Stay down, he said to her, not looking back. Jinho. He was already gone, moving along the wall toward the garden, disappearing into the chaos of shouting security and fleeing guests. Sarah crouched there with Derek beside her, both of them frozen against the stone, listening to gunfire that felt closer than anything either of them had ever lived through. This is because of me, Sarah said, more to herself than to him. This is because of him, Derek said. Demir. Not you. You didn't ask for any of this. A new sound cut through the chaos, a scream from near the garden gate, high and sharp, cut off too fast. Sarah's whole body went cold. She didn't know that voice. She only knew it belonged to Eleanor Whitfield, and that the silence afterward was worse than any gunshot had been. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Jinho's voice cut through the radio static loud enough that Sarah heard it from behind the balustrade. "She's hit. Get the medic to the garden gate, now." Sarah moved before she could think about whether it was safe to. Derek grabbed her arm. "Don't. You heard him. Stay down. That's my grandmother out there." Sarah pulled free and ran low along the wall the way she'd seen Jinho go, ignoring every instinct telling her to stay behind the stone. She found them at the garden gate, Eleanor on the ground, Jinho's jacket pressed against her shoulder where blood had already soaked through, one of Jinho's men kneeling beside her with a radio clamped between his ear and shoulder, calling out her vitals to someone on the other end. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, teeth gritted, more insulted than afraid. "It's my shoulder. I've had worse falls off a horse." "You're not fine, you're shot," Jinho said, hands steady on the pressure even as his voice wasn't. "Stop talking and breathe." Sarah dropped to her knees beside her grandmother, took her free hand, and Eleanor's grip closed around hers hard enough to leave marks. "Where's Demir?" Sarah said to Jinho. "My men have 2 of his down near the tree line." "He's not one of them." Jinho's eyes went past her, scanning the dark edge of the property, jaw tight. "Which means he's either running or he's still out there." The answer came 30 seconds later, when a man stepped out from behind the garden shed with a gun raised, close enough that nobody had time to shout a warning before he was already there. Yusuf Demir looked older than his photos, grayer, but his eyes were exactly as flat and patient as every file Jinho had ever read about him. 32 years, Demir said, gun trained on Sarah, ignoring everyone else in the garden like they didn't exist. "I've waited 32 years for a 7-year-old girl under a car to grow up and forget my face. And here you are. All grown up. Rich now too." "Put it down," Jinho said, his own gun already rising, careful, no fast movements. "You put yours down first, or I put a bullet in the only person who can send me away for the rest of my life." Sarah stayed very still, Eleanor's hand gripping hers, the sound of her own pulse louder than anything else in the garden. "I don't remember your face," Sarah said, voice steadier than she expected it to come out. "I was 7. I don't remember any of it." "Doesn't matter what you remember. Matters what a jury believes you'd testify to, if somebody ever asked you the right questions." Demir's finger moved slightly on the trigger. "So I don't get to take that chance. Then take mine instead." The voice came from behind Demir, low and sudden. Derek stepped out of the dark with nothing in his hands, no weapon, nothing but himself, walking straight into the space between Demir and Sarah like it was the only decision he'd ever been sure of in his life. "Derek, don't," Sarah said. "You don't want her," Derek said to Demir, not looking back at Sarah, eyes locked on the gun. "You want the witness gone. I just watched you point a weapon at an unarmed woman on her own grandmother's lawn. I'm a witness too now. So's everyone else standing here." Demir's eyes flicked toward him, calculating, and in that half-second of distraction, Jinho moved. He didn't hesitate and he didn't aim to wound. One shot, and Demir went down before he could turn the gun back toward Sarah, the weapon clattering out of his hand onto the grass. The garden went silent except for Eleanor's ragged breathing and the distant sound of sirens finally closing in from the main road. Sarah sat on the terrace steps 20 minutes later, wrapped in a blanket someone had handed her without her asking, watching paramedics load Eleanor into an ambulance, with her grandmother still complaining the whole way that she didn't need a stretcher. Jinho sat down beside her, blood still on his sleeve, his hand finding hers in the dark. "It's over," he said. "Is it?" "Demir's dead. His network in this state doesn't survive that. Whatever's left of it isn't coming after you." He looked at her, careful. "You're safe, Sarah. Really safe, for the first time since you were 7 years old." Sarah looked out at the garden, at the police lights strobing against the hedges, at Derek standing near the gate giving a statement to an officer, his hands still shaking slightly at his sides. "He stepped in front of a gun for me," she said. "He did. I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it tonight. Jinho's thumb moved across her knuckles, the same small gesture from the reunion months ago, the one that had started all of this. Tonight you just get to be alive. Everything else can wait. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time since the ballroom lights had caught her ex's mocking voice months ago, she let herself feel something that wasn't fear or grief or obligation. She felt safe. And she felt loved by a man who'd married her for a debt and stayed for reasons that had nothing to do with blood or money or protection anymore. I love you, she said, quiet, into the dark. Not because you saved my life tonight. Because of every ordinary dinner before it. Jinho turned his head, pressed his lips to her hair. I love you too. I have for a long time. I just didn't know how to say it without a debt attached. Say it again. Without the debt this time. I love you, Sarah Choi. She closed her eyes against his shoulder, listening to the sirens fade, the garden finally quiet, and somewhere behind them, Eleanor's ambulance doors closed on a woman who had just gotten her granddaughter back for good. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the head of a boardroom table that bore the Whitfield name, signing papers that would fund a hospital wing dedicated to patients who couldn't afford care, the same kind of fund she'd asked for instead of $50,000. 7 years earlier, in a coffee shop that no longer existed. Jinho watched her from the doorway, a wedding ring on his hand that had nothing left to prove and everything left to keep. Neither of them noticed the black car idling across the street, or the man inside it studying Sarah's face through a long lens camera, making a phone call to someone Demir had once answered to, someone who was only now finding out exactly what his old friend had died trying to finish. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit like, tell us in the comments what you'd do in Sarah's position, and subscribe to Soul Root Stories. We've got more stories like this one coming every week.